Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you might be in the world today. I'm Kathleen Trigg-Jones. Welcome to this Mojo Streaming Live. Uh, we are so delighted to have everyone join us. We've been doing this for a few weeks now and are really excited about the engagement that we've been able to get from wildlife enthusiasts around the world. Today, I'm really excited to invite one of those wildlife enthusiasts to the platform to talk a lot about the work that she's been doing. Samantha Bruegger is a wildlife coexistence campaigner for the environmental nonprofit Wild Earth Guardians. She's based in Salem, Oregon. Her work is focused on advocating for better policies and laws that empower people to coexist. Imagine that. We need to coexist with native carnivores across the West, and at the federal level, we need to start getting some attention. So from working to reform the federal wildlife killing program, USDA Wildlife Service, to developing resources for state wolf planning, Samantha is driven to see fewer dead animals and dispel misinformation on some of America's most iconic species. She possesses a bachelor's degree in gender studies from the University of California, Riverside, and a master of public policy from Pepperdine University, with an emphasis on environmental policy and local government. Her past work experience includes work on local government and business relations, public affairs, rural economics, and environmental policy. So about her organization, Wildlife Guardians, and Samantha, first, welcome to the platform. Thank you so much for joining us today.
For having me.
Absolutely. I just wanted to tell everyone a little bit about Wild Earth, but then I'll let you fill in the blanks. Wildlife Guardians protects and restores the wildlife, wild places, wild rivers, and health of the American West. Driven by her passion, the Wildlife Guardians has tackled some of the most difficult and pressing conservation challenges over the past 3 decades. Small victories, including banning lake hole trapping in the state of Colorado, monumental triumphs such as ending logging on more than 21 million acres in the Southwest, and everything in between there. So without further ado, welcome so much. Thank you so much, Samantha, for joining us today. And I would love to dive right in and talk about your passion and these years and years of research, and not just research, but really work that you've done around conservation.
Sure, I would be happy to. And again, thanks for having me. And I'm happy to dive in with you whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. So, um, tell me first about your background. We just talked about it, but how did you get into this work, and how did this become something that you've dedicated your entire life to?
For me, it really started at a young age. And I think that that's often the case with a lot of us advocates and wildlife lovers. We kind of know when we're little that it's something that we're interested in and passionate about. For me, it was when the sawtooth pack was reintroduced in Idaho. I did a symbolic wolf adoption. I was so excited. I got a newsletter and I got a tape of wolves howling. And I would play that tape every night when I was going to sleep because I was that kid that was just listening to wolves getting lulled to sleep. So it was something that I really loved and have been passionate about. I wasn't quite sure how to get a policy career around wildlife. The hard sciences have never been my strength, nor have mathematics for that matter. But I definitely have always cared and been able to kind of work in the political realm. So
Mm.
I did start out in local government, in the mayor's cabinet in the city of Riverside, really working on business relations. From there, I started with a public affairs firm in Los Angeles, and that was working on groundwater pollution and water policy. And I took that water policy to Colorado, took a detour, lived in a little town of 500 people in the Colorado Rockies, right outside of Rocky Mountain National Park. And that's where I really got to start engaging on conservation and wildlife issues as a volunteer through the Park Service. And I started a nonprofit that focused on water quality of the upper North Fork of the Colorado River. And again, that love for animals is always there. The wildlife in the Rockies is just stunning. We'd have elk and moose outside of our door every morning. And the opportunity arose to really apply myself to a career in wildlife full time. Those kinds of careers, again, are few and far between. I had been searching for something like this my whole life and was able to find it. And now I get to work on wild animals across the West.
Wow, that's an incredible story. What would you say is the biggest barrier to coexistence in the United States? And then I want to point out that a lot of the talks that we have done have been in South Africa and other parts of the world, and it's very easy to point the finger at other places. But right here in the United States, and I'm in Oklahoma actually today in Tulsa, but right here in the United States, we have a real issue on our hands that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I would say we probably have one of the biggest issues that needs to be addressed here at home, where it's just we haven't quite figured it out yet as far as wildlife coexistence goes. I think that there are some other communities more globally that have it more figured out than we do. I'm thinking of communities living with snow leopards or different agricultural communities in South Africa have figured out how to coexist with lions. But here, we unfortunately haven't quite gotten that down yet. If you had initially asked me that question before I started working in wildlife coexistence, I would say it was humans. But a biologist who worked with me made a really great point, and that was we should consider humans as a keystone species, as being an integral part of the ecosystem. And how do we sustain that ecosystem as a keystone species? So what we can really look at is our practices. And so I would point to our agricultural and land management entities really being the issue as far as coexistence goes. And we can go down the line from there. But if we look at even the Forest Service, a lot of people don't know that the Forest Service operates as an agricultural entity. It's housed within the United States Department of Agriculture. It considers timber crops, and it also leases out grazing permits in different allotments or areas throughout the Forest Service system. So forests are essentially managed then for the products that they can provide rather than for conservation or for even the recreation that many of us enjoy on Forest Service land. Wild Earth Guardians actually we just did a hearing for a lawsuit we filed on the Colville National Forest where and that's in northeastern Washington. One of the ranchers there in northeastern Washington has had 28 gray wolves killed on his behalf because they were attacking some of his livestock. And that's livestock left unattended in the woods in a mountainous area. And he still felt that it was his right to not have his cattle, an exotic species, attacked by wolves, a native species. So we've lost 28 wolves just because of one bad actor in the industry there in a corner of Washington where it's really essential for the species to start dispersing from that area. To make matters, more insane, taxpayers are paying for it. We're paying to subsidize these allotments. We paid to kill the wolves. If you're a Washington state resident, it costs $200,000 each time they kill the wolves. And we're footing the bill for this. And a lot of people don't really know that. I think that we go out and we camp and we don't know that this is another part of it, but this is how the land is actually managed. And that's just the Forest Service. We can go through state lands and Bureau of Land Management lands. The only ones that are managed for conservation really are national parks. So that's something to keep in mind when we look at land management, at least on the federal level.
I always say that they're not in our way. Wildlife isn't in our way. We're actually in their way, right? Like we've given them very few options, and then we feel like we have no choice but to then get rid of them so that we can have a better quality of life, so that we can camp out, so that we can build homes and everything. And your whole foundation is built not on eliminating the problem, but coexisting, finding a way to coexist so that we can all get along and live in this place. What would the option be, though? Like in the scenario that you just gave me, what would a better choice have been?
Oh, we could go down the line. There's a lot of better choices. I think that in that particular situation, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife offers range riders. Those are folks who will actually ride with the cattle that are aware of wolf sign. They're trained. They know if there's wolf presence. They're keeping track of where the wolves are and where the cows are. And again, this was a service that would have been provided to this particular rancher for free. He refused that service and still wanted the wolves killed. But range riders are really effective for a broad area. If you have cattle grazing in a large expanse, whether it be an expansive private pasture or an expansive public lands allotment, range riders really do an effective job there as far as keeping wolves away from cattle. But if you go down to like a smaller area or a smaller, like let's say it's a hobby farm, doing things like exclusionary fencing, electrified fencing, having guardian animals, guardian dogs that have been trained kind of to ward off wolves. Donkeys are even effective if we look at other predators like mountain lions. I met a donkey once that had successfully fended off a cougar from attacking some sheep. So it's something that's effective, and it's something that, you know, over the long run, it actually is cost saving too. You're reducing your losses. We're also saving the costs of killing animals, and we're saving the environment. So there's different solutions based on the scenarios that folks are in.
Who's at the opposite end of this talk with you? Is it tourists? Is it tourism? Is it the farmers? Is it, you know, who's really who is it that we really need to reach with this discussion and sit at a table and say, let's come up with some real solutions?
Yeah, I think that there's differing levels. Sometimes it's county commissioners even that are funding a contract maybe with wildlife services to trap or kill coyotes at the beginning of grazing season. So you could look locally. It's going to be your elected officials and decision makers that way. You could go up to state representatives. Is my state contracting in a way that they're killing animals? And reach out to your local reps and see what's going on. Departments of agriculture are a surprising way to look. We were just going over yesterday the Oregon Department of Agriculture's budget, and they have $400,000 set aside just for trappers. So it's being aware that these things kind of find a sneaky way to intertwine through all the institutions that exist. Those institutions were set up in the 1930s before anyone even thought of coexistence. And now we're in a world with a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis, and wildfires making everything a little more intense, even with wildlife conflict. So yes, I would say start with your local decision makers, and you can work your way up. Our congressional decision makers, I'm often talking to congressional staffers saying, how do we get money in the budget for non-lethals? How do we reform the USDA in a way that they are prioritizing coexistence, that they are prioritizing managing or forests or Bureau of Land Management lands? How are we prioritizing managing those in a way that really provides for coexistence?
Right, right. And I had read that going back to the USDA, that there's some things that we really should know. You highlighted some of it, that they actually fund these programs in many cases. So if we want to do better, we have to actually bring the government to the table and highlight the reasons. I didn't know this until I read, you know, your information, but I didn't really think of the contribution that wolves make to our ecosystem. But every species that is on this earth is here for a reason. We're not the only ones that have a purpose here, and everything contributes in its own unique way, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see that even with coyotes with the USDA, they kill almost 66,000 coyotes each year. And coyotes do all sorts of really cool ecosystem services. They're keeping the rodent population down. If the rodent population is down, then disease is down amongst rodents. They're compensatory breeders too. If you kill them, they will actually have larger litter sizes, and then they'll actually be more desperate for food. And you'll have more conflict. But yeah, I think that every animal has a purpose here, and it's up to us to really steward that purpose and to protect that purpose, so we all can be healthy.
Right. You know, there was a website that I want. It's pretty sad when you look at the site, but the Wildlife Services annual kill stats. You just mentioned coyotes. wolves. I imagine, all the different wildlife that is killed by the government is on this list. And it's really, when you look at it that way and think of the enormity of the amounts of wildlife that is being killed for our purposes, maybe because we don't understand. Sometimes we, rather than try to understand and figure this out, it's easier and costs, maybe it's more cost effective, I don't know, but it's really shocking when you go to this site. And that's at, you can visit it, it's at APHIS, it's this .usda.gov. If you go there, you can get an idea of why this is such an issue.
Yeah, and we have a website too, inthewaronwildlife.org. And that should give you a bunch of information and toolkits about wildlife services. And I do want to kind of step back and maybe discuss wildlife services a bit, because many people don't know they even exist. And that's how they're able to kill so many animals each year. What struck me was that when I started this work, I didn't know about wildlife services, and I considered myself pretty well informed. But they are a federally funded wildlife killing program that's housed deep within the USDA, so within the United States Department of Agriculture. Last year, they killed upwards of 600,000 native animals. They often point to some of the stuff they do that's essential, like rabies vaccines or airport safety management. But the majority of the work that they do is for agriculture. And their mission is to protect agriculture from different animals in the country. So they do all sorts of egregious things that you wouldn't think about. Like every spring, before sheep or cows go out to pasture, they will fly in a helicopter and gun down coyotes just to make sure they're not there. And that can be on public or private or both lands. They will also blow up beaver dens and beaver lodges, and they kill wolves. They will gas animals in dens. They gas prairie dogs often. And if you think about endangered species like black-footed ferret that rely on the prairie dogs, suddenly now you've got an even bigger problem. And it's these cumulative impacts that this agency does year after year after year, and nobody knows that they're doing it. And I'm hoping that we can kind of shed the light on really the breadth of the killing that they're doing. And if you go to that website you had mentioned, or if you go to endthewaronwildlife.org, you can look up the numbers for your state and see what they're doing in your state. But this agency has little regard for life. They have little regard for public safety. They accidentally poisoned a child in Idaho and his dog with an M44, which is a sodium cyanide device that looks kind of like a sprinkler head. And if you pick it up or tamper with it at all, it ejects sodium cyanide. And that killed the boy's dog, and the boy was also poisoned. And right now we're pushing for federal legislation to ban those devices. So the agency is, or a program really, is just, it's devastating once you start looking at everything they're doing.
It really is. I want to go back to something you said. You said the bottom line is, so we've highlighted the problem, right? We know that there's an issue. It's a nationwide issue. It's a worldwide issue, in fact. And we are very selfish, I would dare say, as humans, because we don't think that anything is more important than our life, our enjoyment. But you have some steps that you think could make us all coexist better and be better neighbors with wildlife. Talk about those.
I do. My wildlife coexistence 1, 2, 3s. I consider, this can be applied to a backyard, to a county, or scaled out to different programs. But the first thing that you can do with coexistence, if you're having an issue or a conflict, the first step is to remove the attractant. So let's say you're having raccoons get into your trash, then you better secure the trash. In a more rural area, this might be bears with trash. Secure the trash. With livestock operations or with grazing, this can be cows where there's carcasses, and often they'll leave the carcasses out. It's removing carcasses and having, make sure your carcasses are properly disposed of or burned or put in a pit. So that's step one, remove the attractant. Outdoor cats can also be an attractant. If you have outdoor cats, they bring in coyotes. They become a natural kind of prey species, especially for suburban coyotes. So that's another attractant. The second step would be to implement a deterrent. So, what's something that you can implement to keep the problematic animal at bay? Um, Locally, this could be good fencing. In the suburbs, they even have coyote roller fencing, so coyotes can't jump over and into your yard. If you have a small dog, that's something to be thoughtful of and mindful of. Um, Out on the range, this can be things like fox lights. Fox lights are lights that make different patterns and sounds. So if you've got a vast pasture and an animal crosses the line with a fox light, it'll start making sounds. Some of them actually make lights at different times throughout the night. So there's other tools you can implement there, guardian dogs. The last thing would be to really look at, and this is like the last case scenario, is an intervention. It's scaled. If you've tried all the deterrents and you've tried to get rid of all the attractants, then we have to consider interventions, and that's where we would do like bear hazing, shooting bears with rubber bullets and chasing them with dogs so they're afraid to come back to a community or your house. That kind of stuff. Relocation is another one. I know that we've relocated different eagles, even that have been an ongoing issue for different livestock operations. So interventions are less desirable because, again, they have a bigger impact on the animal, but it could save an animal's life. So I'm always for that at the end. But I think the first two usually solve most of the problems.
You know what? A few thoughts come to mind, Samantha. But before I jump into that, though, I want to again just thank everyone for being here today, and remind you that we're going to open it up for questions in just a couple of seconds. So if you have any questions, then keep them, write them down so that you don't forget. Samantha Bruegger, of course, is here with her wildlife coexistence campaign, and that's what we're talking about today. As you were giving those tips, a few things came to mind. One is that if we could just reach children, because it's a little different that, as they say, to teach an old dog new tricks. But our children are they're born with an appreciation of life and wildlife, and if we can just teach these things to them so that it becomes a way of life, as opposed to waiting until you're an adult and now you have real estate that you're trying to protect, or you're trying to protect your family. Now you become the mother bear, if you will, to protect your family. If you could grow up with these tips in the back of your mind and alter your life accordingly, I think the world would be a better place. The other thing that comes to mind, though, Samantha, is the problems that you're highlighting really on the grand scheme of things are small issues that I, as an individual, maybe a raccoon's going through my trash, so I can put some measure in place to stop that raccoon from going through my trash, or a bear shows up at my door, so maybe I don't leave food outside, where the bear can come. But we're, as an individual, as a person, I'm a small part of this, entire ecosystem and this entire problem. You have hunters, you have the government, you have everyone working against everything that you're trying to promote.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's accurate. And I would also say I like to draw a line between there are ethical subsistence based hunters that can be really good stewards of the land. I wish they were more vocal. They often get drowned out by bad actors. Then we have trophy hunters, and I just see a lot of issues with ethics behind trophy hunting. Um, and yes, I would say with the government, there's institutions in place, and we see this across the line that were set up so long ago, and they weren't set up to serve us. They were set up to serve, extraction,
Right.
and they were set up to serve capitalism, and set up to really serve folks that aren't me and you, or people that are enjoying the world each day. So it's really looking at reforming those institutions and engaging with those institutions so they can be reformed.
Right, right. And this is if you're talking about hunters in particular, that's a really big lobby group that's very difficult, if not impossible, unless there's a real swift change, action from the government. And so all of this kind of, the planets all kind of have to line up. And first, people have to believe that this is something that's worth changing, getting behind in order for it to actually stop. So I think you're amazing for doing the work that you're doing and staying the course and using your voice. I encourage you to continue, and we at Mojo Streaming will continue to follow you and get behind you. This is our belief system, and that's why we're all here today. And so our goal really is to lift up those of you who are out there on the front lines doing this work to try to preserve life on Earth. I do want to see if anybody has any questions in the that's listening today. Any questions? Anyone? All right. Well, while we're waiting for that, we did talk about how listeners can get involved, but let's go through that again. You mentioned, I know you have a newsletter. How can people subscribe to your newsletter?
They can go to wildearthguardians.org, and there they can get a newsletter and they'll get action alerts. Advocacy these days can start with a click and go from there. So if you can sign a petition, great. If you have more time, by all means, if you see an issue that appeals to you in our action alerts, there's always a contact there. Feel free to reach out. Beyond that, we need more folks like us running for office, any office, getting appointed. Really taking the dive there. And I know there are a lot of barriers to getting involved, especially on that level. But the more of us that we can get involved, the better chances we'll have. And we're seeing that a lot with wildlife commissions that we've been working on. That's another level you can get involved. And we need more advocates on those commissions because right now they serve hunters, just like you mentioned. And they should be serving the public who trust them to manage the wildlife.
Right, right. I think those are all great ideas, and I really want to encourage people to get involved. I can probably dare say that most people have never engaged with their wildlife commission in their state. I think if we ask for a show of hands, I would dare say that most people have not even attended a town hall meeting or a city council meeting on issues that affect your own family, let alone the wildlife that lives around you. And so I think it's really, really important to continue to encourage people to get involved. We do have one question from Benjamin, actually. How difficult is it to convince politicians right now to support your advocacy? Have you had even in your own state, have you had an uphill battle just trying to reach your own local authorities?
Yes, I would say yes. And there's a couple different issues that we see happening. So we just ended our legislative session in Oregon, and I work on state legislative stuff here. And we were trying to pass a ban on coyote killing contests in Oregon. And unfortunately, that bill died. And I think this is the third year in a row now that that bill has died. And what we see happening with wildlife bills is that even the Democratic legislators might trade a wildlife bill to get another bill forward. So they end up not becoming priority bills, and then they end up dying. Which is something that's too bad. But on the other side, we have some strong champions, and those are the folks that we know will work hard for wildlife. We just had a bill here in Oregon that was going to create predator damage management districts and allow counties to tax for funds for wildlife services. And thanks to some strong legislative advocates in our state legislature, we were able to block that bill, and that bill died, which is, it speaks good to our advocates. It's just really making sure that the legislature is accountable too for those choices, that the bills that they do trade, we try to note that, to push that. We stay in constant contact with different legislators. And the same thing goes for commissioners. Wildlife commissioners have almost as much power, if not more power, than state legislators around wildlife. So there's different angles to really take, and wildlife often comes under attack on different fronts. We saw that with wolves in Idaho and in Montana this session, where the state legislature really just voted to nearly eradicate wolves from both of those states. So it can go one way or the other, but it's important to really pivot, to engage where we can, to do as much as we can, and to not stop. So we don't give up, we persist.
Wow, that's incredible work. I do want to remind people that you can definitely get involved. As Samantha said, you can actually access the Advocate Toolkit and information on wildlife services at her site, inthewaronwildlife.org, in the world. Or in the war on world on I'm sorry, in the war on wildlife.org. We will definitely put that on the screen to make sure that we're encouraging people to come and visit you, and where they can get more information. Can they make donations? This is a not-for-profit organ foundation.
So, In the War on Wildlife is a shortcut. It'll actually take you to a Wild Earth Guardians landing page for my work. And Wild Earth Guardians is a 501c3, like you had mentioned at the top of the show. So, folks can donate. You can say that it's for wildlife coexistence work, and Guardians will honor that. We have some other great programs too, so general donations will be put to good use, regardless how you donate. Uh, but yeah, I think that that's a great way to get involved.
Awesome. Well, I want to encourage you to keep in touch with us as well, Samantha. If we can be of assistance in any way in helping to get any of the work out there that you're doing, if you need resources or help or whatever, please lean on us. Don't hesitate to come back. And you're part of the family now.
Yay.
So consider it an open door invitation.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you again for everyone for joining us. Thank you, Samantha Bruegger. Again, I just want to say one more time, wildearthguardians.org is your website. And if you want to get more information, or find out some of those stats and how you can get involved, in the war on wildlife.org is that site. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again for this live Mojo streaming interview. And if you have any information that you can share with us that might also help, we can certainly connect you with Samantha personally, or you can visit her website. Please continue to follow us, become a member of mojostreaming.com so that you get our newsletter and all the latest information that we're following. Every Wednesday, we do a live stream interview like this, but there's a lot of information and entertainment and infotainment on the Mojo streaming website. So thank you again, Samantha. And thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Have a great day, everyone.